Welcome, everybody, to Club Fantasy's Dynasty After Party. That's right. We're going to be talking all things Dynasty on this episode here on Club Fantasy's YouTube page or podcast feed, whichever place you are listening to this show. I'm back, the one Hudsonian, Joshua Hudson here as host. Been a rough few weeks, but you know what? We're back in the saddle. Joel Wirth is with me. I want to give a big shout out to Who for filling in for me a couple weeks ago when we had Brandon Aiyuk on to talk about the draft prospects. But this week, because we're 6 weeks into the season, you need to find out whether your dynasty team is a contender or a pretender and whether or not you should be chasing that dynasty championship. And we're here to let you know how you can best figure that out. So stay tuned. Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of Dynasty After Party here on Club Fantasy. I'm your host, Joshua Hudson, at the One Hudsonian here on across the socials. At the Joel Wirth. Mr. Joel Wirth is my partner in crime here, our head of Dynasty over here at Club Fantasy. Joel, how we doing today, buddy?
Good. Expecting a big show tonight. We should have a lot of listeners or viewers tonight because it's one of the worst games of the year on Thursday Night Football. A Saints team with basically no starters left that aren't hurt. So yeah, expecting a big audience.
They're down to backups at wide receiver. It's
backups, two backups. Yeah, guys off the street.
They got basically this is like second game of preseason right now. Like this is right. What we're looking at. Like Spencer Rattler at quarterback, the third stringer 2 weeks ago. Bub Means and
starting
Tipton, the starting wide receivers.
Yeah.
You still got Alvin Kamara, but Taysom Hill's out. Like the Saints offense looks brutal right now. So
rough.
Got to be looking up for Sean Payton, right? But you know what? We're not here to preview the Thursday night. If you want to get more info on Thursday night before the start of the game, check out mine and Austin's DFS Showdown video covering these exact same teams. But what we're going to be talking about tonight, Dynasty Fantasy Football, but more importantly, how you can identify whether you should be or are a contender in your Dynasty leagues, or if you need to start selling off pieces to get that draft capital for future seasons as a pretender. So before we get into that, let's pay a few bills real quick. So first, want to give a shout out to our sister site, Women of Fantasy Football, and our partnership with Trophy Smack. You can go to trophysmack.com/WOFF. That's WOFF. Go there and get all of your achievement-based needs. So those championship belts, the trophies, the rings to display, lord over your league mates that you are the one, the chosen one, just like Joel's repping the belt there. All from Trophy Smack. They have cards to, bust the balls of the weekly losers in your leagues. The thankless job of the commissioner. Show them a little appreciation with a ring or a pennant or something that says, you know what? I do appreciate you. TrophySmack.com/WOFF. That unique affiliate link is set up to help us with Women of Fantasy Football be able to send women to these NFL communications events, i.e. the Super Bowl, the NFL Scouting Combine, the NFL Draft. Let them get experience in the fields that they want to pursue careers. That's what these unique affiliate links are for. So do all of your shopping at TrophySmack.com/WOFF. That's WOFF. But of course, because this is the Dynasty show, we cannot talk about Dynasty and not talk about our lovely partnership with Dynasty Nerds. So go over to dynastynerds.com, check out all of their unique tools that they have that allow you to get a leg up on your competition. They have custom rankings, their Dynasty GM tool. You can populate all of your Dynasty leagues into their site to provide values based on their rankings to help you better chase down trades to improve your team, whether it's for this year in that championship chase or for future seasons as you embark on that productive struggle route. Two topics that we're going to be talking about today. So head over to dynastynerds.com, pick your membership, and at checkout, use promo code CLUBFANTASY and save yourself 15% at dynastynerds.com. There's links to both of those sponsors in the descriptions of both the video that you're watching on YouTube as well as the podcast feed that you're listening to us on. It's all right there in the description. So you can check out both Trophy Smack as well as Dynasty Nerds. All right, Joel, now that we've paid some bills, let's go to the tape. We need to find out if you are a contender or a pretender. So if you're going all in or you need to sell the farm, let's first talk about the points of focus that you need to be looking at to diagnose your teams. So the first thing I want to bring up is points for, because you can look at it right on your league page, that home page. When you're looking at the standings, you have your points for, your points against. Some people just typically had bad luck, and people just have their career weeks against them, right? But that points for, let's first off explain what that means, Joel.
It's how many points your team has scored from your active roster spots. So, yeah, I mean, it's a good indication of, and I think max points for is a really good indication of as well. And we'll talk about that in a second. It's how many points you've scored total, but it's just a better indication of how strong your team is than just straight record. Because like you said, there's always a team in basically every league that is going to have, the worst points against, but has a really good team, but just gets somebody's best week. They're playing the second or third highest scoring team in the league every single week. And they've got a terrible record because of their opponent. There's nothing they can do about that. So yeah, it's always a good idea it's a better kind of look at how your team is doing than just straight record is. If you play in obviously in a league that counts record, which most do.
This is true. So I want to bring up the idea of median scoring real quick before we transition into anything else, because I feel like this is something that probably over the past 5 years has started to gain some momentum here in dynasty circles, and in some cases kind of populating its way towards redraft season. So what is median scoring? Why do you like it? Why don't you like it when it comes to your dynasty leagues and kind of determining how your team sits in the grander scheme of the league construction?
I think it's fantastic, and I think it's something every league should use. Basically, are you scoring in that top half of the league in any given week? And if you do, you basically play 2 games in each given week. You play your opponent, and then you play the league median. So if you're basically in the top half, you get a win. If you're in the bottom half, you don't get a win. So, if you have one of those weeks where you have the third highest scoring team and you play the second or first highest scoring team and you lose, you still get a win. The worst you do is you go 500 for the week. So that's not so bad, instead of just, taking the L and not getting anything for it, even though you had a really good week.
And this is another great way to kind of help you as a dynasty manager understand how good your team is, because it sort of takes the idea of the points against and works it in your favor. Because there's a lot of times when people tend to have their best weeks against you, and you're like, dude, I'm scoring points. Like, why does this keep happening to me? But then you're basically just going 500 every week if you're scoring in the top 5, top 6, top 7 of your league, however many positions are in your league, right? So that's kind of a useful tool and something that has been implemented in a couple of my dynasty leagues. And it again, like, you might be sitting at, 8-4 after 6 weeks, right? And you're like, oh, maybe this team actually is pretty good. Are those losses actually losses, or did I just not score enough points? You know what? But I'm in the top 3, so that's all that matters, right? That's what you're looking at. So, Joel, you put here in the show sheet a little nugget on my fantasy league, kind of some tools that they have in their leagues. I know Sleeper has kind of become a very dominant platform for especially a lot of the newer dynasty managers. But talk about this little function on my fantasy league.
Yeah, so if you're on MFL, you go to the league tab on top and go to all reports. There is you scroll down, you go in the standings column, there's a report that's called Power Rank. And it gives you, there's a lot of cool stuff in there. It gives you your record. It gives you your total points for, potential points, which is like how many points you could have scored if you would have set an ideal lineup every week. And then there's some stuff that I like to look at, which like max points for, which I talked about earlier, is, if you've got a team that's scoring, you've got a team that's capable of scoring a very high total. That's probably a team that you don't want to give up on, because if you can just sneak into the playoffs, you've got the ability to put up big scoring weeks. So that's a team that, if I've got a team that's only scoring like 100, my max points is like 100 or something like that, obviously I'd be losing a lot, but then I probably want to, play for next year or the ensuing years. But if I've got a team that has, like the second or third highest max points for, that's probably a team I want to go in on, because that team just needs to get into the playoffs. And like you said, if it's a team that's been outscored a lot, had a lot of points against, if that team can just get into the playoffs, it's got the upside to kind of win those playoff games. So that's one that I like to look at. Then the all play record, which is, it gives you your record against, all the teams in any given week, or all the teams throughout the season. So your all play winning percentage is a good indication of, how your team is doing, even if, you may have a lot of, points against, stuff like that. And then the potential points, obviously, which is, if you've had a tough time setting your lineup and you've made the wrong decisions, it can give you an idea that you still have the potential to be scoring higher points than you have been if you just make better lineup decisions.
Which means tune into our Start Sit show every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. and we'll get you those better Start Sit decisions, right? Shameless plug. It's okay. It's what we do. All right. Yep. Next thing here, and you kind of touched on this, kind of limping towards the playoffs, right? Like injuries have, honestly, what feels like they've been at an all-time high this year, even though I know it's not actually the case. It just feels that way. I've dealt with this in some of my leagues where I'm missing some key players early on, and I'm just like, well, shit, can I climb out of this rut? But when you're sitting the bottom 2, bottom 3 in total points, maybe you should be looking to sell off, right?
Yeah, and I think the question here is your team bad or is it fragile? And I'll use an example. I have a team that I thought was really good going into the year. Now it's a single QB start 8, so it's a very shallow league, but like my QBs were Tua and Anthony Richardson. I've had Puka, AJ Brown, David Njoku, Ramondre Stevenson, Travis Etienne. Like, it's not a bad team.
IR squad. I like it.
Yeah, it's just been devastated by injuries. So I've had people coming to me saying, oh, you want to sell out? You want to build? I don't want to sell these guys off. They're still going to be good next year. So, yeah, it's like, it's been a bad year. It's not going to be my year, but I'm going to have a high pick. And I'm not selling these guys off hoping to get just to the number 1 pick. I don't care. I just want to, you give me a high pick on this team and it stays healthy, I'm good to go. So I don't necessarily need to feel like I need to sell AJ Brown so I can get these points off my team so I can get down to the number 1 pick. No, it's a good team. It just had a really bad streak. It's not going to win. I'm not going to win. I'm not going to make the playoffs. I've given up on it, but I'm not selling these guys off. I'm selling off these guys just to get draft picks, because I'm going to have a good draft pick. I'm going to have a good team coming back next year. So yeah, I don't want to just tear that team down because it's still pretty good. Now, if your team is just bad, if you just don't have guys who aren't performing, if you've got a team that just hasn't been, everybody's been hit by injuries. So if you haven't and you're still not winning, that's probably a problem. You've probably got a bad team then, and you probably need to look into tearing down and rebuilding.
Well, and that's kind of what I'm getting at here, like with some of these injuries, because, if it's affecting your team, whether like maybe it's some of the younger players that are on your team that are getting hurt, right? Like obviously those are the guys that you want to build around, that you have high hopes for. But in the event that maybe there's that, kind of older player, like I'll use Derrick Henry as a prime example here, right? Derrick Henry obviously on the wrong age range for dynasty purposes and plays a position that, isn't friendly to age, even though he looks like he's 23 years old out there scampering through the rest of the NFL right now. But if all of those, younger superstar players that are getting hurt and aren't buoying your team, and you've got a guy like Derrick Henry, that's the piece that you try to move, right? At that point, and you're just saying, look, I'll take the draft capital. I know I'm probably going to have a low or a high draft pick as a result because my injured players aren't working out the way that I wanted them to. But let me get something for the guy that I know is probably going to go out there and win somebody this championship, because right now, the way my team is built with him on it, it's not going to work, right?
Yeah. And Henry's an example of someone who, like, going into the season, you get maybe a second for him at best. Now you're not taking anything less than a first and probably a first plus, because and this is a guy who can legitimately win you a championship if you get the infrastructure of a team to put him onto. So Yeah, sometimes you just want to hold those guys and just see if they pop, because sometimes they do.
All right. Let's talk about underperformance, because you know what? It's a fact of life. It happens. Brandon Aiyuk is a prime example of this right now. Somebody that we had high hopes for going into the season, and things just aren't working out. So, Joel, I want to ask you, how do you sort of approach players like a Brandon Aiyuk in this underperformance that you expect them to be doing one thing, but they're doing the complete opposite?
Yeah, this is a problem for me in that I'm kind of a sucker for talent, and so I'll make every excuse in the book for these guys, and I'm probably still doing it with Brandon Aiyuk, even though I probably shouldn't be. But yeah, I tell myself that it's the holdout, or Kyle Shanahan just doesn't like him, or whatever it is. I don't know, but yeah, I mean that's a guy. If he's on your roster and you're winning with him, you probably want to upgrade and see if you can use him as bait to go get a Derrick Henry or something like that. So, because he's probably more valuable to, a non-contender than he is to you, because it just doesn't look like he's going to turn around. He probably should have by now. He's had really one startable game this year. So, the question, does he fit in the offense? Is he just not as good as we think he is? I don't know, but he's not performing, and that's the bottom line.
Correct. We're going to touch on Brandon Aiyuk here in a little bit. I want to get to this last point before we hit up the chat here. Biggest thing for me, I think, with Dynasty Leagues is looking at the age of your team, right? You have some teams that they're going to go all in, and they're going to get all, the best of the best that they can get. Sometimes those are 28, 29, 30-year-old players. Sometimes they're front-loaded with, talent like a Malik Neighbors or a Jahmyr Gibbs or Bijan Robinson or Breece Hall, whatever it may be, right? Because they went this productive struggle route and they were able to load up on these high draft picks. So I think that knowing the overall age of your squad and really the direction that you're ultimately trying to go with that, I think is a big key. We just touched on, when it comes to injuries and underperformance, if some of those guys that, you're really relying on, but those older players, a la Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, if they're popping off, but they're doing it on a team that right now is maybe 2-4, those are the guys you got to look to sell, right? Yeah. But on the flip side of that, Joel, this is what I want to bring up, because if you've got, let's say, I'll use Tyreek Hill as an example. Like we expect him obviously to pick things up, when Tua comes back. But there's also that variable that maybe Tua doesn't come back. Or if he does come back, he gets hurt again, and we're right back to square one. So if you have these underperforming players, Calvin Ridley, I think, is a prime example, right? He's obviously an older player, 8 targets in week 6 and literally no catches. You put in the show sheet here, send him off to pasture. How can you get rid of an older player that's not producing, though? I think that to me is the strategy, right? How do you work through those types of landmines with your dynasty teams?
Yeah, like we talked about Jalen Waddle on the Trade Block show the other night, in that, he's a very polarizing asset, but right now he's not doing anything through no fault of his own. But like you said, does Tua come back? And even if he does, like, Tua wasn't playing well when he was in there. So,
yep.
So yeah, you've got to, like, a guy like Waddle is always going to have some value because of the talent level, stuff like that.
But he's younger too.
Yeah, exactly. But a guy like Tyreek Hill is a perfect example. Is, he's too old for a rebuilder, and he's not producing for a contender. So yeah, how do you move him? That becomes a real problem.
And at that point, you're ultimately just kind of selling him for whatever you can possibly get, just to rid yourself of that. Because if you end up getting stuck holding the bag and he never produces, now you're just like, well, shit. Because when you might have been able to get a late first, you might be lucky if you can get a mid-second or low-end second and maybe a dart throw like a Jordan Whittington or something, right? Yeah,
and that's where I'm always going to say, don't just try to sell Tyreek Hill for a pick or something like that. Make it part of a bigger deal. So you can get more value out of him. Yeah, maybe you have to give up something you don't want to, or maybe you're not getting back as much as you think you should. but don't just try to do a one-on-one deal for Tyreek Hill. Make it part of a bigger deal that you can kind of fluff that value a little bit in.
All right, so I want to bring up Caesar's question here from the chat because I think it builds to the idea of like strategy talk, right? So he's like, talk about swapping picks. He's like, is that a smart way of betting on yourself? So let's all right. Let's say you're 3-3. You're kind of a middle of the road team record wise, and you've got a team in front of you that maybe is 4-2, but their points for is rather low.
Here's what I'm going to say to that.
Making let's say a first round pick swap for something along those lines.
Yeah. The disaster scenario here is that your team just kind of bottoms out. And think about this. If like 3 weeks ago, if you were sitting there with like Nico Collins and Rashee Rice, you were thinking you were in a great spot, and now you're kind of screwed. So that's through no fault of your own, right? So that's the kind of danger of doing this, because you always want to have that pick. Obviously, if you're sending your pick for a productive player or whatever, you're getting some value out of it. But just swapping your pick for someone else's pick, that's not something I want to do, just because you're losing the flexibility of, if you're, the worst case scenario is that your team kind of tanks and you don't have your own picks next year. So that's why that's not something I would want to do.
Yeah, for me, when I don't really do a ton of pick swaps unless it's like, my first for your second, something along those lines, like in those types of deals. Like, I'm not trading my first for another first, like, unless it's a different year and it makes sense based on, the construct of the trade or the scenarios from year to year. Like, those are ultimately the types of ways that I'm looking to include draft picks. So to answer your question, Caesar, no, don't quote unquote bet on yourself in that front, because you can't always control, because remember, this is a game of fantasy. We're betting on other people's ability to do things. A lot of variables when it comes to that. Next thing I want to bring up here, it's a start sit question from Orange. Would you start this week Xavier Worthy, Jalen Waddle, or Demario Douglas, who popped off this past week and has 3 of his last 4 with an over 29% target share? Joel.
Sadly, I think the answer is not Waddle. And I'm not sure I'm going to, even though Jacksonville's defense is terrible, it's London, so things could get wonky there. So, yeah, I'm going to start Worthy and just take the safe play.
Yeah, I think Worthy definitely represents the most upside here. And I will say that the sneaky girls who were on right before us, they've been crushing their picks, and they love Xavier Worthy this week. So,
wow,
I'm more than willing to go on their side, but I will say I do like Demario Douglas overseas in against Jacksonville this week. Jacksonville secondary is a little banged up, and quite frankly, their defense
brutal
is trash. So, and with Demario Douglas just playing and commanding targets the way that he is, that's ultimately how you want to kind of ride this out. So, Travis, I do see your question in the chat. If you could just do me a huge favor, you're talking about trades. Let me know if this is a redraft trade or a dynasty trade, because that's ultimately going to decide whether or not I bring it up in the chat or on screen, because this is a dynasty show. And I do want to preface that we want to try to keep everything focused when it comes to trade talk and strategy and things like that on dynasty. We're more than happy to still answer the question. I do want to remind you that. So, all right, let's get into the next section here. So now that we've gone through and figured out how you can diagnose your roster, now your championship window is open. So, Joel, let's talk about how you want to go through the moves that you want to make, the types of trades you want to make to get yourself into that championship window.
Yeah, so the first thing I'm going to do is assess my roster and where are my needs and where am I potentially weak? Like, could one injury just kind of screw me and take me out of contention? And like, I think are you like a legitimate championship contender, or are you just trying to sneak into the playoffs and see what you can do? Because there's nothing wrong with either one. But you kind of need to make different decisions along the way. So if I'm like top 2 or 3 team, and I'm looking for I want to win this year. If I'm obviously I need to assess my roster. If I have a ton of running backs, I don't want to buy a running back. If I have a ton of receivers, maybe I need a running back. I don't want to buy the running back until the latest possible time. I want to wait as long as I can. So if that's, I have a late bye week or something like that, I want to wait on running back just because the injury risk is so high. I don't want to spend like my first round pick on Alvin Kamara, and then Alvin Kamara gets hurt tonight, and then now I've got no ammunition left, and I don't have the assets. So if it's a running back, I want to wait as long as I possibly can. So do I have week 12 buys or something like that? That's going to be a problem. So kind of look ahead, look at the schedule, and see where you're going to be weak. The other thing is, just don't make deals just to make deals. And we say this in the offseason, but it works here too. Like I've got a team the other day where it's a full point tight end premium, and I think I'm second or third place in this league. And somebody offered me like Evan Ingram for a first, which is like in a vacuum, it's a perfectly fine trade. It's probably a really good trade, but I've got like 3 startable tight ends, and I'm really weak at running back. So I don't want to give up my first to reinforce a strength. I want to give up my first to reinforce a weakness. So I can't really take that deal because it doesn't really help me, right? I've still got kind of a weak spot on my roster that I didn't address. So understanding where your weaknesses are, where your potential weaknesses are. If you've got, you thought you had a good running back room, but now, your RB2 was Travis Etienne. I think that was part of the question that we're going to answer here in a second. Now, all of a sudden, what you thought was a strength is kind of a weakness because he's going to be hurt, he's going to be out, and he may not come back to a job. So, same thing with like guys like Rachaad White, stuff like that, Bucky Irving, who now all of a sudden has to deal with Sean Tucker, where you thought you had, you thought you were in good shape. Now it's like, does he have the job? Does he have a role? So yeah, kind of get the long-term view of what your strengths and weaknesses are, and just try to address those. Try to address it through that way.
I like what you said about kind of waiting till the last possible minute for the running back position. But I also think too, the same can be true really for any trades, right? Because we've seen everybody get hurt. It hasn't been just true. Running backs, right?
Right.
So
no, that's true.
I think really is if you're looking to make deals, just make a deal, because at the end of the day, you still have to win from now until week 10 to put yourself in a position to even buy those running backs, right? So like maybe you're not going out and you're trying to get Derrick Henry because you know that he's going to cost more, or go and get Alvin Kamara because you know he's going to cost more, right? Make the smaller moves. Go and try and get a James Conner or a Tony Pollard, like some of these, aging guys that may likely get hurt, but aren't going to cost you near as much. And that they're ultimately going to help you get to that week 10 point to where if you need that one extra push, you still have that first, you still have, future years draft capital. Now you go and make those bigger moves to solidify that championship run. If you're making moves, make moves to improve, plain and simple. Don't make moves just to make moves. I agree with what you're saying wholeheartedly there, but scared money don't make money, plain and simple.
Yeah.
So,
but that's why I want to make the distinction of like, am I a top tier contender or like a middle tier contender? Because if I'm a top tier, I've probably got some wiggle room to kind of wait. Mm-hmm. I can wait for the best deal. If I'm like a 5-6 seed, something like that, I probably need to make a move now to kind of reinforce so I can get up to that spot. So maybe I can get a buy, something like that. And that buys are really important. I mean, you cannot minimize the importance of buys, because like playoffs are a crapshoot. And if you can get a buy, you got to do everything you can to get that buy.
All right. So we've identified your championship window, how you're going to approach it. Let's flip that script a little bit. We're embracing the suck. We're going to tank. It's the productive struggle. Let's break down the roster. Where do we start? Obviously, we mentioned you're going to start with those older players. Get those off your roster, because all they're going to do is add points, and points cost you draft position. Some leagues, not every league, but some leagues utilize max points for. So even if you try to go the route of the tank and just purposely bench the players that are going to score points, them scoring points on your bench is still going to affect your overall standing. This is why we say shed points. Get them off your roster. Let them be someone else's ticket to the championship because you're aiming for 2025, 26, 27, beyond, etc. Right? Any other points you want to make when it comes to this, Joel? Like how you want to kind of attack this versus, just shedding points?
Yeah, and I think you made a good point with the potential points thing is that as many leagues as I'm in, I just can't think of any that use just straight record for like draft position, stuff like that. Most leagues have some kind of anti-tanking measures. Just and tanking is fine. It's not setting a competent lineup if you have the players on your team. That's the problem. So yeah, most leagues have some way to deal with that. You know what I just said? It's the converse of that. Like I said, I didn't want to take that Evan Ingram trade because it didn't help me fill a need. If I'm trying to move guys off my roster, look for the teams that you can fill a need for. That's where you should be attacking. Don't just say, don't just trade block and throw. I'm gonna put my guys out there and hope somebody makes me an offer. It's not going to happen, and you're going to have 5 other teams that are doing the exact same thing you are. Go out there, be the one who is making the offers. Put the offers on the table. Are you going to have some that go wrong? Absolutely, but that's going to happen no matter what. So be the one, if you're the tanking team, if you're the team that's trying to get points off your roster, get them off your roster. Go out there and make offers. Don't wait for other teams to come to you.
So one thing that I like to look at when it comes to, the idea of kind of selling off, what's the compete window, right? Like how long before my team that as currently constructed, how long before it can realistically compete, right? So I think that the easiest thing to look at is the ages of your players. I remember, I can't remember which show it was. Maybe it was one of the trade shows, but you were talking about Justin Jefferson, and we all know he's a top 3 dynasty asset, right? I don't think that's debatable at this point. We know how good he is. We know he just signed an extension. He's on a second contract. But if your team is so bad and he's the only cog that is worth a damn, by the time you're ready to compete, is he still going to be that cog in that center of your roster? And I think that is a very underrated aspect of embracing the suck, right? It is, entering that productive struggle route. When you know your team top to bottom, the ages, the route that you need to take to ultimately get better. Those are things that you need to take into perspective. Look, I'm a huge Jamar Chase fan. I've got one team with Jamar Chase, and it is just bad. And I'm like, he's only 25, but it might take me 3 years because it's just that bad of a team. I got no quarterbacks. It's a super flex league, right? You got to trade for quarterbacks because apparently drafting them now doesn't work either. So, these are things that you kind of need to consider when you're going through and building that draft capital. And Joel, I want to bring up this draft pick side of things because, obviously the firsts are the golden tickets, right? Like those are the ones that everybody's chasing, but there's just as much value in those seconds and thirds and hell, even 4ths or 5ths if your league does those, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you collect enough of them, you can package them together and move up if you want to. I guess the one thing I would say on that is, just remember back to the draft last year when, you may or may not have picks, but all of a sudden a player that you like just kind of started slipping and you're like, man, I wish I had a pick here. So, if you traded that, made that trade earlier last season, you may have a pick, even though it may not be sexy now to have a late second or, third, something like that. If you're a rebuilder, you want as many shots as you can because, there's probably 15 players in any given draft who are going to turn out and be worth their draft capital. They're not always going to go in the top 15. So you just want as many bullets. And it's the same thing like the real NFL draft. You just want as many bullets as you can because it's really hard. It's really hard to pick which players are going to turn out and which ones aren't. So get as many shots as you can. You want as much ammunition as you can to go get those guys.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing to remember. Draft picks are liquid, right? Like they're constantly, the closer you get to those respective drafts, those picks are just going to go up in value because there's literally no name attached to it. Once you make that draft pick, it's like driving a car off the lot. It loses half its value right off the bat. It's just how it is. But draft picks are the unknown because you can go through and you can start making these moves to trade off players. And now you've accumulated all those draft picks. You get them over the next year, the year after that, maybe the year after that. Who knows? I don't know what kind of players you got. Maybe it could fetch 27 first-round picks, right? Well, now you have the ability, if you hit on the draft picks in that 2025 class, now you've got all that draft capital in 26 and 27, and you can trade those liquid assets to get players to help you actually compete in 2025. So that's the way to work it and utilize those draft picks. You don't have to make every single draft pick that you acquire. That's the fun part about Dynasty, because the wheeling and dealing aspect, especially on draft day, take somebody like Jalen Tolbert, for instance. Some people liked him. I think he was a third-round pick in his draft class 3 years ago. Didn't do shit for 2 years. Some people dropped him flat out.
Yeah.
Actually looking halfway decent right now. That's a guy that can help
He's an
fill
asset.
out your bench. Yeah, that's an asset now, right? He becomes a depth piece for a contending team, right?
Yep.
But you ended up getting him for a few fab bucks because somebody else dropped him and you just needed to fill a roster spot. So now you can utilize that. Maybe you can get a late second, third-round pick. That third-round pick you can attach to another trade, get you a potential first-round pick or a player that can help you next year after as you build out this productive struggle, right? These are things that you need to keep an eye on when it comes to Dynasty leagues. Joel, before I answer Caesar's question on air, anything else you wanted to bring up on this?
A couple things, getting back to the point you made on Justin Jefferson, is we talked about that when we were talking about Malik Neighbors and saying that for a non-contender, I think Malik Neighbors is probably the most valuable asset, non-quarterback, in Dynasty right now because, yeah, like you said, if you're 2 years out from contending, Justin Jefferson's going to be 28 by that time. Jamar Chase will be 27. They will still be productive, but they won't have as much Dynasty value as they do now. Like, the community Dynasty value, trade value that they do now, just because they'll be in that, they'll be where like a Deebo Samuel is today. It's still productive, but aging and kind of getting to where they're starting to push. You can see 30, they're not at 30, but you can see it from there. So yeah, if you've got a Jamar Chase, you got a Justin Jefferson, go out and see if you can get a Malik Neighbors, a Marvin Harrison, something like that. And that's how you want to work those trades. If you don't think you're going to be able to contend in their elite production, elite Dynasty value windows, get guys who will, and that are safe, valuable, will be extremely valuable assets for the next couple of years. Don't just trade those guys off for Brandon Aiyuk, Jalen Waddle, and a package of kind of mid-tier guys. Get another valuable piece, extremely valuable, high value piece that's just not as valuable as those guys, and another piece with it. And that's how you kind of build out your roster.
Yep, makes sense. All right, I'm going to bring this question up from Caesar because when you're talking Dynasty, I think this is a very useful tool. So he asked if there's any free league analyzers that you can recommend. He's like, he discovered Fantasy Calculator recently, and it's a pretty cool feature. Obviously, we have our partnership with Dynasty Nerds. Dynasty Nerds does offer something along these same lines that you can import all of your leagues, kind of break things down, compete, non-compete, trades you can make, player values, things of that based on their rankings. Yes, it does cost a little bit of money. And as you mentioned in the chat, Joel, $4 a month. Mere pennies per day. Not very expensive.
Just try it out. You don't have to buy a full year. Just try it out. See if you like it.
There you go. They work strictly on a month-to-month basis. There are plenty of other sites that do offer something similar. The only other one that I can think of off the top of my head, because I have used it in the past, is DLF, Dynasty League Football. But Joel, if there's any more that you know of, by all means, share.
I will shout out Dynasty Daddy, who I think is free, and met those guys at the expo this year. Very cool. Dude's like 22 or something like that, and he built this entire site. It's very cool. Really good guy. He and his wife were at the expo. They had a booth. Very cool people. Liked them a lot. And I love their product, so I will give them a shout out.
Yeah. And of course, we got to give a good shout out to South Harmon. They have a lot of really cool tools over there. SouthHarmon.com. Mike, Adam, Koopa, all those guys. They have a lot of really cool tools. Their work tool is fantastic when it comes to helping with Dynasty. I don't know if they do a league analyzer per se, but they definitely have a lot of really cool tools that you can feature with that. All right. Let's get to the player side of things. And if anybody else out there have questions, by all means, drop them in the chat. If there's any redraft trade questions, we'll answer them in the chat itself. But if you have Dynasty trade questions, start sit questions, strategy questions, whatever it may be, hit us in the chat. If you're new to the show, hit that like on the video. We greatly appreciate it. Throw us some subscribe. We just crossed 1,280 followers or subscribers, working our way up to 1,300. So hopefully we'll be there in a week or two, right? That's the goal. So, all right, let's get to these potential trade targets. I first want to shout out our trade show on Tuesday nights, 9 o'clock here on Club Fantasy. Joel, Hoove, Dusty, they put some players under the microscope. They answer all of your Dynasty trade questions. But these are some guys that I kind of thought of just off the top of my head based on age and production, that if you're a contender, I think you can probably make some offers for a reasonable price. The first one I bring up is Tony Pollard. He's currently RB19 on the season. He's averaging 15.2 points per game. 4 of his 5 games, he has topped 15 fantasy points. The Titans went out, signed him in the offseason, gave him a 3-year, $24 million deal. There was a lot of speculation that he would be in more of a 50-50 timeshare with Tajay Spears. It has been anything but for Tony Pollard in Tennessee. He has been carrying the lion's share of this offense, and now Tajay Spears is dealing with an ankle injury. So, wheels up Tony Pollard. I bring this up because, Joel, I want to get your thoughts on kind of where you see his value and what you as a contender would throw out to get him. But also, if you were a pretender and had Tony Pollard, what would you realistically want for him?
I don't think you're going to get a first for him, but I think he's someone you actively want to target if you are a contender, like you said, because we went into the season thinking that, like I said, it was going to be he and Spears, and they're very similar players, so they would probably just split time. It hasn't happened. It's been all Tony Pollard. Spears is now hurt. We don't know how long. And Will Levis is just as bad as everyone thought he was, and Tony Pollard is really the only thing working on that offense right now. So yeah, I think he's going to get a ton of volume. And that's the kind of player I want to go out and get. So are you getting a first for him? Probably not, just because I think people are afraid of the offense and, just a Will Levis offense, and that it could just crater like it did the other day, where basically D-Hop and Calvin Ridley are both complaining about their roles and things are bad. But yeah, I think multiple seconds at least. And they should be high second. Like I don't want to take like 2 back end seconds for Pollard. I want something more than that. He's a guy. Can you do Tony Pollard and a second for a first or something like that? You go out and get yourself a late second so that you don't want, if you're a non-contender, you don't want to give up a second, which is, may only be like 3 picks difference from a late first that you're getting from a contender. But go get yourself a late second and give Tony Pollard in a late second and try and get a first for that.
So one player that really kind of came to my mind here, if I'm a contender and I have, let's say, Tyrone Tracy, a lot of questions with what his role is going to look like once Devin Singletary comes back. Obviously, he showed in 2 games that he can be a productive player in this league. If you're a pretender, would you take straight up Tyrone Tracy for Tony Pollard?
No, I don't.
I think that's a very viable question, because contenders probably do want to keep all of their running backs, and pretenders, if you're trading assets, you typically want draft picks or wide receivers, right? Like those tend to hold the most value the longest. But if you have that eye towards, I can make this a quick turnaround, Devin Singletary really hasn't been anything. There's a chance that Tyrone Tracy's a starter next year, and now I've got a starting running back. Would you make that trade?
I would do like Pollard for Tracy in a second. I would.
Okay.
That's
kind of what I was thinking. Like, Tracy second, maybe Tracy in a third, worst case, but something back, right?
Something else on top of. I wouldn't do Tracy for Pollard straight up, but if I got something else of value, I'd do that.
Okay, I like it. All right, next one I want to bring up is J.K. Dobbins. So he'll be 26 in December. Obviously, a lot of questions with him coming into this season because of the Achilles and how few running backs have bounced back from that injury. Especially so quickly after the injury. He shot out of cannon the first 2 weeks, looked really, really good. 3 of his 5 games, he's top 90 yards. He's been involved in the passing game. It hasn't been a ton, but he is on pace for 41 catches, and he has 3 games this season over 18 fantasy points, and he's currently the RB13. So, Joel, I first want to get your thoughts on Dobbins, and if you are a contender, would that be somebody that you would look to go acquire?
I would look to go acquire him right now because he's someone we're looking at. We looked at going into the season as, he might have a role. He might be better than we thought, but how long is it going to last? When's the other shoe going to drop? He's got the calf that's like this big. How long can he last coming off these injuries? So, I'm not going to sell I'm not going to give up all my, my kind of my trade ammunition for him, but I want to get him now because I want to get that, if he only gets to 9-10 games this year, if he can get me, 3 or 4 startable games while, I've got bye weeks or something like that, that still has value. So, and it's a guy you're not going to have to pay a first for. You can probably get him for a second straight up because a non-contender does not want him on their roster. They want to get him off. So, I think you can get him for a reasonable price. And I want to get him now and just use whatever bullets he's got and get them into my lineup.
So, as a contender, would you actually look at Dobbins past 2024, given that he's only in LA on a 1-year deal?
No. I don't look at it as an asset because he's not going to have any trade value for the rest of his career, basically.
No, it makes sense. I agree.
His value is only productive. So, he's a guy I could see being a rotational back, a guy you could use as a bye week fill-in going forward or something like that. But I'm not going to lean on him, and I'm going to go into the season next year thinking I've got a running back spot filled with J.K. Dobbins.
Okay. Next guy I want to bring up is Aaron Jones because obviously we know how good he has been in the past. He's looked really good to start this season. He has over close to 10 fantasy points in 4 or 5 games. He's averaging 4 targets a game. We know what he's able to do in the passing game. And he currently sits at RB14, so 1 spot below J.K. Dobbins. But he's going to be 30 in December. So you're essentially kind of similar with Dobbins. You're looking at a 1-year rental. But when I was going through and kind of looking at this and like, what would I have to give up to get him? What would I be comfortable giving up and get him? Even at 4 years difference, I actually would be okay paying more to get Aaron Jones than I would J.K. Dobbins. And I want to know if you agree with that.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So I'm not crazy by thinking that. All right.
No.
So realistically, then, what would you be looking to give up with Aaron Jones? Because I feel like with all 3 of these guys, they are sort of in that similar bucket. I think in a vacuum, I think Pollard probably is the most viable asset beyond this year. But all 3 of these guys, I think, hold very similar value for at least the remainder of 2024.
Yeah, I think Aaron Jones will be a high-end producer whenever he is available. Now, how much that's going to be, when he was in Green Bay, he usually missed anywhere from 2 to 5 games a year. But when he was in there, he was really good. And you look at what he did what the entire offense did once he came back last year is he was putting up 100-yard games, basically every game. And he was carrying that offense once he came back from the knee injury. So he's a guy who can carry a running back room because he's that damn good. He's in a really good offense now. I think he's got value. If I have Aaron Jones, I'm not giving him up for anything less than a first. Now I'm gonna have to give up more. I'm not probably gonna get a first for him straight up because he's a short-term guy. But if I have to add something to him to get that I'm not giving him up. Like I got offered like Ricky Pearsall for him straight up in a league. I'm like, come on. No, I'm not doing that. I'm not giving him up for someone who I have no idea is any good or not and might get shot again. I don't know.
Oh God.
But I'm not giving up for an unknown quantity that, he may get on the field and not be any good. He may not be able to get on the field even when he comes back. So I want a realistic asset. Yeah. So if I have to give up, again, he's the perfect kind of Aaron Jones in a second, give me a first, something like that, because I'm not giving him up for less than I want a first back in return to give him up.
That's fair. And that's kind of how I am. Like I have an orphan that I took over and I'm sitting there with Aaron Jones, and he really is the only running back that I have of any sort of value at all. Everybody else is like a third on the depth chart type running back. Like it's bad. And I'm just like, he's doing really well. I'm like, look, I got to try to at least get a first for him. But I mean, I got half this league's not even willing to give me a second for him. And I'm just like, are you serious right now? I'm like, all right, maybe it's early in the season, so I get it. But like every single week, I'm just like firing off trades, like trying to not be too annoying, but I'm trying to make it known. I'm trying to get rid of this guy. This guy is not helping me score less points.
Yes, I mean that's where you need to get creative. If you need to package a couple of guys to get a first, do that. So package a Dallas Goedert or something like that, who's not helping anyone, but might help a contender.
Yeah, I do have David Njoku on that team. I might see if I can try to put Jones and Njoku in a deal and get a first back. I think that's a fair trade.
Yeah,
Dynasty for
absolutely.
For a rebuilder.
A contender should want to do that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, especially now with no Amari Cooper there in
exactly
Cleveland. All right, let's move on to this next bit here. I wanted to highlight some struggling players that still have some value, even if it's taken a bit of a hit over these first 6 weeks of the season. We talked about Brandon Aiyuk a little bit earlier. Want to kind of continue that conversation. Obviously, we know he's coming off 2 straight 1,000-yard seasons, held out this offseason, finally got the extension that he wanted, staying in San Francisco. But he's averaging less than 4 catches per game, and through 6 weeks still has not scored a touchdown. If you're a contender, as we talked about, if you're a contender and you have Brandon Aiyuk on your team, I think it's okay to feel that you don't want him on your team anymore because he's really not helping you in any way, shape, or form. So I want to try to talk through what you would realistically look to get in a deal back for Brandon Aiyuk, just from a value perspective, because we know it's not picks, right? You're not giving up Brandon Aiyuk to get picks back when you're a contender. You want players that are going to help you win.
Yeah, Aiyuk is like what Dontavian Wicks aspires to be, right? He's like a metric god. The reception perception, shout out to Matt Harmon. Those guys are going to love him because he's really good on our route running basis. But the production just isn't there. It's never elite. He's never gotten elite, huge target share. Yeah, he's like 105 targets, 114 targets. That's good. 84 targets, 96 targets. But he's not like up. Yeah, he's not up to the 150 targets that guys like Justin Jefferson and Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams in his prime, that those guys are going to get to where you just can't help but have massive production at that level of target earnings. So, yeah, he's just never been able to get those elite targets. So he's never been like super productive as a fantasy player. So, yeah, he's a guy I'm going to look to shop and get. Can I trade Aiyuk straight up for Derrick Henry, a guy who's now, like you said earlier, if you have Derrick Henry on your team, you're probably contending. There's probably no way that you're not contending with the Derrick Henry. But can I get a Saquon Barkley, something like that? Can I get an asset for this year that is actually producing, that probably is pushing the age cliff in a way that Aiyuk is not? That's the kind of deal I want to make with him.
So do you think, how would you put Tyreek Hill in this? Like, would you do a 1-for-1 swap, Tyreek for Aiyuk?
I'd be like, what's the point? Yeah, Tyreek, I just don't know what that offense is going to look like. If Tua comes back, is to any good. So yeah, I'm just kind of out on Tyreek Hill right now. So that's a hard one for me to answer.
That's fair. I thought I think both those guys are kind of in a similar bucket, just 4 years difference in age, right? Tyreek's pushing 30, Aiyuk is 26. Ayuk's still going to have value, but very similar to what we were talking about with Justin Jefferson is that, for a pretender, quote unquote, to acquire Aiyuk, you have to be able to flip him, plain and simple, because he's really not helping your team at this point. Because by the time he can, he's going to be 28, 29 probably, right? Unless you feel like you can quickly turn it around, and then now you're right back at it, and maybe he does finally get back to that 1,000-yard upside in next year at his age 25 season, or 27 season, excuse me. But something else that I wrote down, and it's similar to what you brought up earlier, is that, maybe he's on a team where the contender hasn't yet needed him, right?
Sure.
Do you think that if there's other, and this is kind of what we were talking about earlier, is like identifying the other teams in your league, making them trade offers that they need, right? That can help them and fill needs, etc. Maybe there's a team that, is pretty top heavy at wide receiver, or that they have, enough assets that are popping to where if they were to acquire Brandon Aiyuk from you, he becomes a future piece for next year as a stash, basically, right? Like, you can withstand him sucking. But, maybe they're sitting there with a Ladd McConkey, a Keon Coleman,
sure,
maybe a Brian Thomas Jr., somebody like that, Xavier Legette. Would you try to make that deal to get one of those guys? Would you look at it as an even swap, or would you want draft capital back from them as well to make that move?
Yeah, I'd want something back. If you're going to take on Aiyuk, I think you have to assess your league, and you have to be in a league where you have to be in a pretty active league. You don't want to be kind of holding the bag in a league where there's really no activity with a guy like Aiyuk, because you want to be able to kind of catch a wave with him. He has 2 or 3 hot games, and now I can go flip him and get, more than I paid for him. So that's the kind of situation I'm looking for if I'm buying an Aiyuk.
Okay. All right. So let's look at some of these less expensive players that you can try to build trades around that ultimately, are going to help a young contending team take that leap maybe a little sooner rather than later. One guy that I've really started to kind of change tune on from the offseason is Xavier Legette. When I was going through and doing my projections, he really does fit into that X role that Dave Canales wants to run, which is the same role that we've seen DK Metcalf as well as Mike Evans fill in respective offenses under Canales. He's had 2 startable games this year so far. He's had both those games. He was over 7 or more targets. So we started to see some flashes. We know that Adam Thielen is now out for at least the next few weeks. Deontay Johnson currently dealing with an ankle injury. So there's a chance that maybe Legette starts to really sort of get the ball rolling here in the next couple of weeks. But I still think that when it comes to Legette, there's this stink, quote unquote, that why was this guy selected in the first round? He's not that good, right? Like, we know he has the draft capital, but the perception is the guys that win in the second round, a la Coleman, McConkey, those are the first 2 that popped in my mind, were better. And they ultimately were drafted ahead of Legette in rookie drafts. So where do you think that he kind of fits amongst the trade targets value wise? If you're a pretender, is this somebody that you would be looking and being okay trying to go after and get?
Yeah, I think it's the perfect guy, like you said. If he's on a contender that hasn't needed him, that's where I want to kind of go target him, because can I get him as like a throw in a trade as kind of an ancillary piece back? If I'm trading Aaron Jones, can I get Xavier Legette in a second or something like that to make that deal, to where the the contender doesn't have to give up their first, but I'm still getting a pretty good package because I think Legette's a pretty good player. He had a 10 target game. I mean, those don't happen by accident. Obviously, the offense has been better with Andy Dalton. I mean, here's the thing about the Panthers is their defense is terrible. So they're just going to be a lot of shootouts. They're going to be playing from behind a lot. They're going to be having a lot of garbage time. So yeah, I think he's got the opportunity to have some productive games that'll kind of raise his value without necessarily kind of raising your total points. You know what I mean? To where you're not really affecting your draft status, but he's a guy who's going to kind of raise his value as the season goes on.
Another guy that I was looking at was Jordan Whittington from the Rams. He'll be 24 in October. Obviously, we know Cooper Kupp. He's older. He's 31, coming off an injury. Puka Nacua is already out and has a history of injuries. He's 2 straight games. Whittington does over 12 fantasy points. He's shown that he can operate within this Rams offense. I mean, he's kind of an unknown at this point. Most people just kind of have him on taxi squads and are just kind of like, oh, that's a guy that is even on my roster. What? Huh? Go through, you make a trade offer, get him back plus a second or something for, I don't know, Deontay Johnson, maybe somebody along those lines. Sure. Like,
yeah,
worth the stash. Yeah. The next guy I want to bring up, because you typed these in here, Rashee Rice, Isiah Pacheco, etc. I'm guessing these really just kind of along the IR mold of things. So go ahead and talk about these guys.
Yeah, it's guys who are injured and are not coming back. Like, you're not going to get a Nico Collins from a contender because he's going to be back in 3-4 weeks, whatever. But like a guy like Rashee Rice, who's going to be out for the rest of the year, that was a guy who helped a team get to this point, and now they're losing them. So they're a contender, and they're losing a big reason why they are a contender. So they need to replace that if they want to have a legitimate championship. If they want to make a run at a championship. And it's probably a team that maybe didn't go into the season thinking they were a contender. Like, nobody thought Rashee Rice was a top 5 receiver coming into the season, but he played like that for the first 4 weeks until he got hurt. So that's a guy I want to go target. I want to go, I want to build a package for a contender that they can see, okay, yeah, I can replace him and I can, fortify myself somewhere else. And I'm giving up something that isn't helping me this year. Yeah, it's a dynasty asset, but I want to try and win. I'm in position to winning's hard, man. Winning dynasty leagues is hard. So if you've got a chance, you need to go for it. So those are the kind of guys I want to go target if I'm a non-contender. I want to buy these guys. And like, Rice doesn't even have, it's not like a ACL tear. It's like a PCL or something like that. Or
LCL, I believe.
Corner ligament. I don't even know. But it's not like an ACL that's going to cost, he's not going to be himself for the first couple months of next year. Like an ACL, like a multi-ligament tear would. So it should be a pretty simple injury to come back from. I expect him to be full strength on week 1 next year. That's the kind of player I want to target. I want to go buy if I can, because I think he's ripe. The manager of the Rashee Rice team is probably ripe for the picking.
I think you can throw Puka Nacua into that argument as well. I mean, these are guys that,
extremely.
Puka popped last year. His dynasty value shot through the roof. I think he was going as like a top 8 pick in 1 QB drafts,
Especially now with bye weeks and that he's not back, because if you've managed your way through at this point, now the bye weeks are coming in. It's like, man, I really wish I had Puka on this team, because now I'm starting, Jordan Whittington or something like that.
Right.
Or I'm starting Xavier Legette, and I like him in the future, but this could be a 1 target game and then I'm screwed. So now is the time. If that's where I said, go target these contenders. Look at their rosters. Look at, do they have a bye week? They got CeeDee Lamb. Look at CeeDee Lamb. Does he have a bye week issue? If you've got Lamb and Puka, and now you're down to your wide receiver 6 that you're having to start this week, go try and make that deal.
All this to say, dynasty is hard. So when you see that winning window, do not hesitate.
Jump.
Go get it. Jump. All right. Friendly reminder, if you haven't already, hit the like on the video here on YouTube. Shoot us a follow, a subscribe. All that helps us continue to grow as a channel. We absolutely love it. Greatly appreciate it. We love helping everybody win, whether it's Dynasty, Redraft, DFS, Best Ball, you name it. We have shows for literally everything. Next time we'll be on air probably next week for us. I'll be on Saturday with Joe and our good friend Leo, Master IDP from RPO Football, answering all of your start sit questions. You'll see Austin and Ryan on tomorrow morning, Friday, on DFS Academy, breaking down the Sunday slate for week 7. So a lot of good nuggets coming from there. So shout out once again to our partners at Dynasty Nerds. Go to dynastynerds.com. Check out any and all of their cool features. Once you select one of their memberships, use promo code Club Fantasy at checkout and save yourself 15% off that membership. And of course, our sister site, Women of Fantasy Football, and their partnership with Trophy Smack. Go to trophysmack.com/WOF. That's WOFF, and get all of your fun, cool, achievement-based needs. This has been Club Fantasy's Dynasty After Party. I am Joshua Hudson, the host. That is Joel, our Dynasty brain here at Club Fantasy. We'll see everybody next week. Peace out, y'all.